always looks messy, but we like.
Okay, I think we're live. Jonah, great, thanks.
Yeah.
HW Cam is rolling, so we'll get started. Good evening, thank you. I'll call to order the January 31st Wenham Fin-Com meeting. We'll get started. I wish it wasn't January 31st, because I'm sick of the weather. It's way too cold. So we've got a number of department budget review items on the agenda for tonight, quite a few. And we'll get started with those. Any general comments from Leslie or Peter? I have none. We can get right into it. Okay, terrific. Okay, so first up is the Planning Board. Margaret Hoffman, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we've got the numbers, and it doesn't sound like there are any late-breaking changes to that which you worked with Leslie on and Peter. So
yeah, nothing's new. Really, nothing's changed.
Okay, we'll let you walk us through it, and in whatever level,
Okay.
give an overview or.
All right.
We'll
so
questions.
The salary and wages, there was an increase of $2,056 from last year, and then an increase in expenses of $1,255. The salary and wages were the 2% COLA that's applied to all the salaries and wages based on the 52-week year. The expenses, the additional expenses, where it was a funny one we found on our itemized list from last year, was the mail machine upstairs. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of mailings in the planning and zoning department, and we didn't realize how expensive those would get. Not that we didn't realize, but the number was a little bit higher than we had the previous year. So we bumped that up a little bit for the number of mailings we do. We also handle the permitting software for the GOTMS. That is our, that's CAI Technologies, isn't it? GOTMS,
so
or is that the new one?
That's the new Acela permitting.
Oh, okay, that's the new Acela. All right, I'm sorry, because last year we had that other one that I had not been aware of when I first started. But so yeah, this is a new software that we're getting for permitting. Planning Board and zoning and conservation will also be utilizing that software. So we're going to have some additional expenses for that. Mass Association of Conservation Commissioners, their dues went up a little bit. So we added a little bit there. And we also, this department, we handle the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, Conservation Commission. We also added the Open Space Committee and the Economic Development Committee. So between those two, smaller, not permitting boards, but we've had some expenses, some mailings, and some other additional expenses for those. So that's why we added to the expense line. So that's about it.
So in terms of the software that you use, it sounds like, so some of it's for permitting, GIS. Are these like, are these kind of like mapping type topos?
There's a couple of different things that are going on. We have, I manage the GIS layers and data in our office. And online, when you go to the town's website, you see our mapping program. You can go on to the assessor's maps. That's all managed through this office too, and with the assessors. So we split that bill, but we have to pay a service fee to the company that hosts that mapping. And they help us throughout the year to keep updates on the layers. So that's one part of it. The other, the new permitting, the new GOTMS software, that's more for record keeping. And the Planning Board and Zoning Board, whenever we get applications, will in order to track those, we'll be using this software. It's going to be used mainly in the permitting office for building permits. It's really good for that. But planning, conservation, zoning, any special permits and things that we handle can go through that software. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit overlap with permitting and with.
Yes, this new software, we will be overlapping with them. Yeah, we do. We work with the assessor's office and with permitting. And
the idea is to tie
Tie them all.
you know, those projects together through a centralized database, because
Yep.
right now it's just a database in the permitting office. We actually got community compact grant funding, IT grant funding last year.
Okay.
So they're fully funding the conversion, and our annual licensing fees are staying the same. We're actually locking it at the same rate for the platform that we have now. But we've added this module to loop planning in. So
Okay.
there's a little bit of cost impact.
The primary revenue is fees generated for planning?
It's actually, yeah, so it's
Is that-
6% of the permitting fees go.
6?
Yep, exactly. So it's actually comes off the top.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sounds like this would provide more efficiencies, wouldn't it?
It
Between the
should.
departments, I mean, at the end of the
Yeah.
process, and the
Yeah.
communication's gonna flow a lot better.
Mhm. Yeah, it will help communication flow between the
Yeah.
departments for sure.
Also gonna help the applicants, because it's also,
Yeah.
it's gonna
Yeah,
be
makes it
accessible
easier
online.
on them.
Yeah, in terms of tracking and pulling up
Yeah.
that historical data.
Yeah.
I have a question. If you look at from FY15 through FY19, there's a decrease from 15 to 17. It goes from 70,000, well, down to last year, it goes from 70,000 down to 62,000 over the course of several years. Do you know what that was related to? Was that just like across the board cuts,
Yeah.
or?
That was before I arrived, so
Yeah,
I'm not
that-
sure what happened prior to
That
that,
was,
Peter.
the permitting position was actually budgeted in the planning budget. So that was just a
Oh.
move, a shift of salary from the planning, land use department over to it. It was essentially
It
a
was when I-
half-time position.
When I started
Yeah.
managing the budget for my department, they
Right.
moved my position into my department.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So it was, you know, net,
Mhm.
it was just a shift from a .5 FTE from planning to permitting for budgeting purposes to reflect where that
Okay.
person actually worked.
Mhm. Makes sense. More closely align the department's discrete kind of accounting for them. Good question. Great. Seems really straightforward to me.
Okay. All right, if you have any questions, I'm always around. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, from planning, land use, to Jackie with the permitting office.
So I have two. I have permitting, which is 240, which is where I'll start before we move on to Board of Health. For permitting, you'll notice a 2% COLA for all of the different inspectional positions, as well as the permitting coordinator position. You'll also notice a 2% potential merit for the permitting coordinator position. That's denoted as 18.25 hours in this budget, but that position is a full-time role that comes from different funding sources. But otherwise, salary pretty straightforward, 2% across the board for the COLA. And no change at all to expenses. And as Margaret said, so my department has historically managed the GOTMS program, which is now going to be the Acela Civic platform starting in FY19. No intended increase of expenses. It's still that 6% revenue, as Peter mentioned. And we had the grant funding, so we're going to be doing that implementation this spring to the new software. So for my department, it's really beneficial because it's going to take data from approximately 2003 to 2005 to the present and pull that into the new software. And we'll have a stronger online permitting presence. Right now, we kind of have a system through the property tax online collection company, City Hall Systems, but that's not what it was meant for. It was not meant to be accepting permits. So this new program will hopefully increase our e-permitting as well, which we have been seeing a good amount of e-permitting the past year. Actually 2 years now. So but those expenses will remain the same for the department. And that's permitting.
Got a question for me? See if I get it right. Were you still looking at combining some of the activities, or didn't you get some sort of grant?
Yes.
Look at combining with Hamilton?
So the Inspectional Services Department received district local technical assistance from the MAPC, which is really staff time. It's not like grant funding, it was staff support. As a part of, it generated from the idea of shared services as a part of a FinCom working group that Peter and myself were working with Alex and then Chair Mike Lucy to look at shared services, particularly for inspectional services. And so we received that funding with Hamilton and Manchester by the Sea. And so the three communities have been working with MAPC over the past few months to look at models, staffing models, what type of support each community would require, and to look at costing scenarios. So I know that may be coming before the FinCom in a joint session with Hamilton in the next couple of weeks, but I'll let Peter speak to that more.
Yeah, so we're in the process, obviously, when we got the grant funding and began working with MAPC and Hamilton and Manchester, you know, we let them know what our timeline was in terms of building the budget and going to town meeting and everything. And so we are continuing to churn away, and we've got a pretty close to finalized draft intermunicipal agreement. At this point, it looks like, just based on a number of different factors, it's probably going to be shared just with Hamilton, as opposed to Hamilton and Manchester, the way things have worked out and going through the process and everything. But we're finalizing what the financial impact is going to be, would be for next year if we were to move forward with the shared service model. And so I am expecting to have that draft IMA on the Selectmen's agenda for next Tuesday night to have some initial discussions. Right now, the way that it's set up, Wenham would be the lead community, so we would see some financial benefit from being involved in that way because of, you know, being able to charge overhead expenses. We're giving them some office space. We might be giving them a vehicle.
They being Hamilton?
They being Hamilton.
Okay.
Yep. So there has been, just stepping back a little bit, there's been a off and on informal shared service model with Hamilton in terms of inspectional services. Each of the three different positions have been shared at different times. I don't know if all three have ever been shared at once. But this would be a much more formalized arrangement with an intermunicipal agreement. And so I'm expecting one way or another the FinCom's going to see that in the next week or two. We'll
The cost,
probably take that up at that point.
the cost won't go away, it's just.
Right,
you're
I
still gonna
think,
pay the-
you know, the initial, even the initial conversations we had was, it might not necessarily be something where we see cost savings. If anything, there might be some added costs, but it's about, you know, a sustainable model long-term. And also some areas of improvement in terms of service delivery, particularly on the zoning enforcement and other things.
Right.
So I'm thinking we're going to be talking about this in the next week or two.
Good,
So
yeah.
there'll be plenty more to dig into at that point.
We'll stay tuned for Tuesday's meeting for BOS, and we'll see the terms of the IMA, and like you said, there's no real low-hanging fruit for big win savings, most likely, but helping support Jackie's permitting office and the great work that she does, right, operational efficiencies, and it's all about like better service and keeping track of the stuff and continuing to do a great job.
I think what's important is getting some more staff capacity. You know, there's a lot of zoning that we sometimes work with Margaret on in our office, and there's a lot more of zoning than there used to be. We also have a lot of bigger projects coming up too that will be more staff time, I think, for our department. We've got a subdivision on Dodges Row coming up that I think is going to take some additional staff time than we're currently used to, as well as potentially Wenham Pines coming up in the next year or two as well. So if those two projects converge at the same time, I think that'll actually be more hours than we're used to in all three of our inspectional areas, because we haven't had a project of those scales all at once. We've had a project of 20 units that's been over the past 10 years at this point. So that's obviously a very different scale, 20 units over, 8 to 10 years. We don't know what to expect out of these two new projects, but I think it will be a greater use of our resources for sure, which I think this model, if it proceeds, will be helpful in having that staff capacity already built in when the time comes.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good.
Any other questions on permitting? Okay.
Okay, so I have the Board of Health as well, which is 510 in your book.
Thank you.
Board of Health, the salary side is very straightforward. It's just the 2% COLA across the board for the 3 folks who are under our salary line, which are all inspectors of health or our public health nurse. So that's salary, pretty straightforward. If you look at the expense page, that's where some of the differences come into play. We are going to see an increase in Board of Health expenses this year. Of $708, and those are for a couple different reasons. First, there was $120 in our salary line for the Board of Health for the members. They each had a $40 a year stipend that none of them have been collecting for the past few years. So they decided to move that money from the salary line to the expense line within their own department so that we can use that for some of our additional expenses. We've also increased our expenses in regards to flu clinics and vaccines. The Wenham Board of Health has always done joint flu clinics with Hamilton. This year we did our own for the first time at the Bucher School, which is our shelter site. It's our emergency dispensing site. So we were able to do an emergency dispensing drill and have our flu clinic completely up and running, which is great for the emergency preparedness goals that the Board of Health has. So we did take on some additional costs purchasing vaccine outside of our regular arrangement with Hamilton. And we look forward to doing that again next year. We had a lot of success and a lot of people who joined us at that flu clinic. We offered different hours than Hamilton slightly, so we actually saw a kind of different demographic. I think we saw more kids, families, whereas Hamilton COA, I can't say this for sure of every flu clinic, but from my observations, we get a lot of our senior population, it's hard to get folks that are coming home from work. So we went a little later in the day, and we did see more families, still a lot of our senior population as well, which is great. So it's trying to find the best way that we can offer that service with Hamilton. And then the last increase that you'll note, so we do have our health agent, Greg Bernard. He is under expenses because he's a contracted health agent. And so you'll notice that he's getting a little bit more than the 2% COLA. And that's due to that Greg's been here for about 8 years now. And until I was here, he hadn't been receiving any kind of COLA increases over those period of years. So last year was the first part of a 2-year kind of program to get him that increases that he'd been missing for those years. So that is reflected in that $708 as well. So he's our health agent who covers, beaver permits and all of the area of responsibility for septic. So he is very busy with those items.
So he's contracted to generally by other municipalities as well?
So he is a professional in the septic field. He designs septics professionally. He has his side company, and then he also, I believe, works for the community of Ipswich doing just one area of inspection for them, which is, if you've gotten your septic done recently, he's a soil test inspector over there, so he's just viewing the soil testing process for them, and then he does the whole process for us here. But his main work, his main full-time position is his own outside company, where he's a septic designer.
Okay, so that's why it's because it's his company primarily that he's contracted versus stipend with the other 3?
No, not necessarily. That's just how the Board of Health hired him much earlier than my time. I think that's how they had always handled that position. And the way it's handled is that Greg bills the town for his hours, not as his company, just as him. So we're actually only paying for Greg when we use Greg. It's not like, for example, our animal inspector, who's a state required position, who gets a monthly stipend. She doesn't work all year. Some months are very heavy for her, some months are lighter. Same thing with our food inspector, whereas Greg bills hourly. So in the summer, obviously those bills go up when we're doing more in the field, and then in the winter they go down. So that's how the Board of Health worked it out. And I think in 2008 is when he started. So that's how they've always handled that.
Pleasant Pond testing, that's with the company, BioMarines.
Correct. They go out every week from during the summer months, Memorial Day to Labor Day, and test the pond. They let us know that it's safe to swim, and then we let the PD know as they manage pond operations. So every Friday, the pond's being tested all summer through the swimming season.
And you'll see at the joint session with the Hamilton FinCom next week that's one of the items that Hamilton is billed for as part of that arrangement.
Right.
So we do charge Hamilton their share for the pond testing.
Right. Along with lifeguards.
Right.
Whether it's police, detail, or gatekeepers, right, right.
And general
Not
supplies and
detail, but,
equipment,
yeah.
Yep.
Great. Do you think, Jackie, that you'll keep with our own flu vaccine clinic versus partnering up with?
I think we're going to probably maintain both.
Okay.
I think for the Board of Health, that's the first time we've done an emergency dispensing drill. Actually, I had asked Bob Blanchard before when he was still here, if he had remembered in his time, of doing emergency management work for the town, if he had recalled an emergency dispensing drill occurring, and he did not have one in his memory. So that's the first time we've done that emergency dispensing drill, which if there wasn't, an issue where the entire town had to be vaccinated, that's the procedure for getting that vaccination up and running. So we've now successfully done that for the first time. So we have a lot of vaccine refrigeration protocols. We had to be set up as a site with the Department of Public Health so we can access vaccine. We had to do a lot of billing preparation so that we can bill for those vaccines. So we're in a place that if the town, everybody needed to be vaccinated, our public health nurse has all the protocols and procedures ready to activate that dispensing site. So I think long term for the Board of Health, it's important to do that as an emergency preparedness item, as well as regular service delivery. But at the same time, it's also great. We work with Hamilton in a more formal arrangement, but a lot of the public health nurses help out each other at each other's flu clinics. So it's actually a really great collaboration in the region because all the public health nurses volunteer at each other's flu clinics. So it's actually really a lot of camaraderie during that season for them. They help each other out. So I think we'll probably do some combination of both. I don't know what that'll look like. They're actually going to be talking about that sometime this year of how they want to more formally move forward. But I think the first one went well. We didn't have any major hiccups. It went relatively smoothly, so that was really great. And we really appreciated the Bucher letting us in and go through the process in their space.
Do most of the town employees take advantage of the flu clinic?
We saw some town employees. I'd have to ask the public health nurse. She has the demographics of, Hamilton residents, Wenham residents, town employees, and school employees. We don't require you to be a Wenham resident to come into the flu clinic, nor does Hamilton in the one that we share with them. So we did see some, but I can get you those numbers.
Well, that's all right. It's just kind of, but there's no requirements for school employees to get a shot, right? To get a flu shot.
The schools do offer their own flu clinics, though. Yeah, their nurse's office for students and staff, as far as I'm aware.
So do you have a sense for the number all in that were provided at vaccinations?
I couldn't say. I know we were in the 60 or 70 range for our flu clinic. Mm-hmm. I would have to check my invoice for Hamilton to see what they did for numbers this year for their two that we co-supported. But I know the first flu clinic this year, I was helping some there. It was busy. It was nonstop at that first flu clinic. So I would say we're in the 200 just between the two Hamilton and Wenham flu clinics, 200 people. But I know Mary Beth Ting, who's our public health nurse, she also is the nurse at the Miles River Middle School, so she could probably get that data.
Just curious, yeah.
Yeah. It was a good question. I don't know the answer to, so.
Easy to get a flu shot, that's great.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Any other questions for Jackie? Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Wenham Fire Department up next, I think, right?
Yep.
Right. Chief Kavanaugh, thanks, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. We've got an update for your budget that Leslie provided us with.
capital expense.
Believe so, yes.
That'll be funded with free cash, the 30,000 for the new portable radios.
So these are
Bought those?
police.
We asked for those last year?
Please.
I asked the same question the other night. I forgot. I knew one department got them and the other.
How do you know we already bought them?
Shortly thereafter. Still in the box?
Oh, but they'll be compatible with the police. No, you're gonna have your own.
No.
They won't be compatible.
No, we haven't had them compatible for quite a while.
They're on different frequencies.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, but you can still link, okay.
Been at least, what, 7 years?
I won't ask for
At
it.
least that.
I won't ask for it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, feel free to walk us through the overview that you've put together.
We have a decrease in salary and wages. That is the elimination of the, cover the transition to the new chief. And was it half sick time? Or part of sick time? I believe.
No, half his sick time is in 18 and the other half is in
Yes.
19. So
Yep.
that's actually level funded. It'll drop off in 20.
Yeah. We have a decrease in expenses of 9325. Decrease in the capital of the 15,000. That would be the, because we have no more lease on the utility truck and the chief's car. We have a 2% COLA applied to the salaries and wages, a 2% merit for FY18 for fire chief, fire captain, and firefighter. We added 25,000 contingency for staffing of the ambulance pilot program, just to ensure the funding for adequate coverage during weekends and after hours if needed.
We making any money on this or still too early to tell?
Still too early. We
We still haven't gone live yet.
Right.
Oh, oh,
just got an email tonight, so we
Late
gotta,
breaking news, okay.
we haven't figured it out yet, what they're trying to tell us.
We're basically, everything's in place. We've been waiting for the final approval from Medicare now for 2+ months.
Yes.
Government
And
was
so
nice.
as soon as that's squared away, then we can go live, and then it's gonna be a one full calendar year pilot program. So, unknown yet on the revenues and expenses. I mean.
And before you see any revenue, it'll probably be, during the first start of the billing cycle, it'll probably be 3 to 4 months before you see any
Right.
activity, so.
We do have $35,000 in projected revenues from the pilot program built into the FY19 budget on the revenue side.
Right.
And then the $25,000 contingency, just because we think that we will have adequate coverage staffing-wise, to, handle responses with enough people and in a timely manner. But in case that becomes an issue as we go through, the first few months, we want to be able to have flexibility to make adjustments to make sure, especially on those kind of off hours, that we've got people there.
Like school vacations, holidays, stuff like that, but.
Right.
Just because it's still, except for the 3 full-time employees, all relying on the call model.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Ties in with the call model.
Yeah.
We got the ambulance on the cheap from a neighboring town that was
Yeah.
retiring it, right? And we figured 35K in revenue was the estimation for FY19, and the expense was what we're building in here, right?
Just that 25.
The 25, yeah.
And again, those are conservative on both ends.
Right.
It's conservative on, the staffing end, don't really anticipate needing that much. And we are hoping for more than 35 in revenues.
Right,
yes.
In the now 6 months, we'll have an FY19. But where we haven't done it yet, we're not gonna count on those.
Right, and it's not good, it's good money, but not a good reason. So we're in a
Yeah.
race for the revenue, and we want it to be successful long-term, so want to make sure it gets off to a good start.
Yeah.
Quick question. The billing to the insurance companies and Medicare, how's that facilitated?
Third party. We
We
hire
have a
some-
third-party biller that does all that for
We're
us.
not getting in the business of
Well, that's what I was wondering.
of handling all that, yeah.
what I meant.
And they take.
It's a 3% cost.
It's a 3% cost that they charge.
And who is it?
What's the name of it? Pro EMS.
And they do everything, Medicare, insurance.
Yep, they do
Medicaid.
everything.
They do.
Mass Health.
We shopped around several different companies, talked to some folks, obviously, who've been in the industry a long time, and we feel comfortable using this company. They've seen good returns. They've worked with other municipal fire EMS programs, so.
3% is reasonable, too.
And their returns were pretty high, so,
With it.
yeah. Like I said before, the elimination of the 8338 in wages from FY18 to cover the transition to new fire chief. Reduced on-call wages by $23,225 to better reflect the past 3 fiscal actuals. Expenses, the $3,300 for emergency notification system contract eliminated due to the rec grant, the regional emergency center. And the $15,000 decrease for fire administrative vehicle, FY18 was last payment. And of course, the $30,000 for the portable radios is funded with free cash.
Sorry to be fixated on the radios, Chief. It's only because the question I have is more curiosity. 'Cause
On what was
I
that?
buy radios a lot, so I was just curious. What company are you buying from? Or you haven't figured that out yet?
Haven't figured that out yet.
Oh.
We're gonna try and get them for hopefully close to $1,000 a piece. So, and that hopefully will cover some little cost of maybe any software or anything that would have to go with it.
Yeah, okay.
You got any tips?
I'm sorry?
You got any tips? You said you buy radios.
No, what I buy is
I have a question about the emergency notification system. So we reorganized that several years ago, is that correct?
No.
No?
In September, we went to a new provider. So through the Emergency Dispatch Center, they secured funding from the state to basically take that on for all of their member communities, all 5 member communities. So we just made that transition, I want to say,
Yeah.
yeah.
And is there, this is complete hearsay, rumor, but I already heard someone say that we're maybe considering, or that it may be reorganized again?
So are
Is
you
that-
talking about emergency dispatch, or are you talking about emergency notification system?
Or the rec center itself,
Probably the dispatch, which
Probably
is
the
different than
dispatch,
this,
right.
it
So
sounds like.
so we transitioned to regional dispatch up in Middleton,
That's where you.
5+
Yeah,
years ago
yeah.
now.
I think 7 years ago.
Right.
And.
Yeah, it was the dispatch, not notification.
Correct. So, not to pitch next Tuesday, next but there's going to be a robust discussion about the current state of the regional dispatch up in Middleton and some potential options, other options out there, and whether we want to begin to explore them.
Okay. And what budget does that come out of?
So that comes, you don't actually see that in the operating budget, it comes off the cherry sheet.
Oh.
So it's $82,000 in change that the town has paid from the inception of going to the regional dispatch center. And that's based on a $16.26 per capita charge that has stayed the same throughout. And there are a number of potential changes that are being considered at the rec, including State 911 taking over operations. But at least at this point, our understanding is that for FY19, that $16.26 rate and the $82,000 a year we're going to pay is going to stay the same. What it looks like for FY20 is a pretty big question mark.
Okay.
That being said, they did this current fiscal year for the first time push back a number of charges that they had previously handled. And
As in absorbed?
yeah, and they, honestly, coming in the door, they said yes to a lot of things in
Yeah.
a lot of different communities, and in going through the budget process, we realized that different communities were getting different services from the rec. And so, when we agreed on this fiscal year budget, those costs were pushed back on municipalities. So we have an additional $14,000 or $15,000 of cost besides that 82,000 that goes towards municipal dispatch.
It's not on the operating budget.
So those 15,000 are between fire and police departments. Those are now in there this year, and it's Verizon lines, that kind of thing, air cards, and just monthly expenses.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief, how do you, so how do you balance like I mean, I guess to better reflect the actuals for the on-call wages, the number of on-call firefighters is up, which is a good thing, right? You succeeded in kind of bolstering the capacity there. Is it
Yep.
21 or 31? You're up to 31-ish, right? Somewhere in that 30-ish range?
30.
And, but that's added capacity, which helps you service-wise, but doesn't necessarily mean greater on-call wages, because that's dependent upon, of course, the calls themselves
Yes.
and the frequency, so.
Yeah. I mean, you
so
get
that
9.
reduction,
Yeah, a lot of times you don't get that 9, so.
right.
But it's our average, but it's, a lot of times you don't get it.
Yep.
But it's a lot better than the 6.8.
Right, right. Yeah, and that would be this that we had a couple of months ago when Chief
Oh, that's right.
had the projection on wages and calls. And I had, thank you, had one other question. So the radios, these are long-range radios that'll give you guys the communication capabilities that
Yes.
you obviously need. I know the others weren't working in the woods and everything else.
Yep.
And they are a lot cheaper, I think, than the police radios too. So they probably, right, weren't they?
Yes.
Like 2,600 or so for the
Yeah.
police radio?
These are a lot cheaper.
Any other, and then big capital items. We had the pumper a year or two ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And are there any others that you expect over the next few fiscal years in terms of added equipment or big capital expenditures?
The only thing is, rescue truck is, in poor condition, but
How old is it?
20.
20 years old?
How,
It's starting to show its age, so. I mean, it's done its job,
yeah,
that's for sure.
So for right now, we've got that slotted in placeholder, but it's a ballpark $100,000 purchase, and we've got slotted for replacement next year.
Next year.
2020.
2020.
What truck is that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's the rescue truck,
The rescue truck.
yep. It had the jaws, everything on it. We have recently taken all that off and put on engine 3, and,
Is that the one that looks like a big ambulance? Am I,
yes, it's a box truck.
the box truck?
It's parked out back right now, so the ambulance could come in.
So we got that built into the capital for 20?
We do.
Up for discussion.
I feel like I'm.
Or is this a discussion we have in 20?
I feel like a broken record here. So, at the selectmen's meeting next Tuesday night,
We're gonna,
honestly,
We just table this meeting till after the selectmen's meeting?
no, so, there's obviously been discussion off and on over the years about, potentially joining the 2 fire departments, Hamilton and Wenham. And that was last looked at, whatever it was, 4+ years ago.
It's looked at about every year,
Yeah.
for the last 30 years.
So another thing that's been discussed off and on over the years has been, okay, not necessarily combining the full departments, but sharing apparatus. Big ticket items, the rescue truck, relatively cheap relative, compared to, a pumper or ladder truck. So there Hamilton, I believe, has a new truck scheduled to be replaced sometime in the next year, or at least make a decision on whether they're going to purchase a new vehicle. And so they've expressed interest in working with us on looking at the feasibility of sharing apparatus. So we've asked MRI, Municipal Resources, Inc., who's done some consulting work for the town capital plan and a couple other projects, to put together a scope of work. And they've done that, and we're going to talk about it at a high level at the selectmen's meeting next Tuesday night. The cost of the study would be a little under $10,000, split between the two communities. And yeah, not sure where it's going to go necessarily, but at least we're going to have start to have the discussion next week. And my understanding is that Hamilton would be on board in at least funding their share, but we don't have funding anywhere for it, so it would be an RFT coming back to the FinCom, you know, if the board is interested in pursuing it.
Is part of that study going to do a risk analysis, or you don't know that yet?
Yeah, I think a big piece, my understanding, I haven't been here for all the conversations over the years, every other year. You know, one of the major question marks is what would that look like operationally? Maintenance and training and everything else. Obviously, the fire model is built on mutual aid and working with other neighboring communities. But actually sharing physical equipment and understanding what that would look like is a major concern, and so that's one of the things that MRI is going to be looking into, besides all the national fire safety standards and everything else. But you know, there's some potential synergy given the departments are about a mile apart from each other.
Chief, there is a fairly in-depth feasibility study about 8 to 12 years ago.
Yep.
With a lot of the detail that you're referencing between the two communities. And this is probably a discussion for another time, but what surprised me in that was not only were there not cost decreases in that study, there is cost.
It will be an increase.
Modest cost increase.
Not only use the truck twice as much, you're training on it twice as much.
Well, location of another.
See, our truck now, the
station,
rescue.
It was quite remarkable, actually.
Our rescue is a specialty truck.
Yeah.
We don't need a pump. So they're looking to share a pump.
They need a pump, right.
So we've already taken most of our equipment off of Rescue 10 and put it on the other trucks. So.
But anyway, you might want to dig out that study.
And that's a discussion we're going to have. I mean, we're going to have that.
Yeah, and I think honestly, you know, bottom line for us in terms of combining departments, we know that I mean our call model works.
Yes.
There's nothing broken with our
We're not
system.
broken.
We're as lean as we can be in terms of
Right.
the service that we provide based on the staffing that we have. I think it's a different situation in Hamilton, which is why, you know, they're looking to potentially partner with us. But when that study was done 4 years ago, at the time, the answer was our costs are only going to increase if we went to that model. And so that's where, you know, I don't think there's any appetite or interest at this point in engaging about, you know, a fully shared department, but the apparatus.
That's a whole different study, a whole different question.
Peter, I think in one of the selectmen's meetings that we kind of agreed anyway, the rescue truck would go away, and if there wasn't any money to go towards anything, it would be more ambulance.
Yes.
Providing that pilot worked correctly.
Yeah.
Oh, so you could see phasing out. It sounds like you're sort of already decommissioning the rescue truck.
Yeah.
But you're not concerned about service delivery of critical care because you've got other ways of getting it.
Yeah, because
fiscal year 20 is just a placeholder. That's all that is.
Right.
And, right. So if we would stick with, if the pilot program is successful and we stick with fire-based EMS, we know that we can't run that on a $7,000 used ambulance.
It's a nice one.
But we're going to try.
Yeah.
Right, right.
But that ambulance presumably would be the backline ambulance, and we purchase a new one, and you know, to Jeff's point, at that point, we would sub that vehicle out in for the rescue truck, and, you know, the rescue truck would be retired. So we wouldn't necessarily be changing the number of vehicles in the fleet, just the type.
And so that 100K placeholder isn't gonna go away, it's just gonna have a different title next to it.
Yeah, although.
For our purposes.
Yeah, a new ambulance might come in a little less than that, depending on, I mean, there's a pretty wide range depending on what you purchase. But, you know, initial discussions we've had, we hope to come in at that number at the most, and probably slightly under if we were to buy a new ambulance.
On that report from 10 to 12 years ago, was there staffing increases or decreases?
I can't remember the detail, but I think there was increases in locations of firehouses, an additional
Yep.
location for a fire.
Yeah, I believe it was out near Rubley Road.
Out Rubley Road, and I think there was even some staff. But that's what's being discussed now. It's really
Yeah.
just a sharing of equipment.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
And from that, we'll stay tuned for
Yeah.
Tuesday's meeting, and
Right.
certainly your department will work closely with
Yeah.
Peter and the BOS on possibilities, and then we'll,
Yeah.
you know, any sort of agreement would dictate it sounds like the grant's probably more on the legality of it and the fire safety and examples of where it's worked, and then the numbers are dictated via whatever potential arrangement we have with Hamilton. And then we would get to see those, but that's a little ways off. Great.
So, we probably talked about this in November, but I just wanna make sure I'm reading this correctly. So you average 750 to say 800 emergency responses a year?
Yes. And about half those are medical.
Wow, in Wenham.
Yes.
That's a lot. That's a couple, several a day.
How many of those are alarms, false alarms, smoke detectors?
Quite a few.
Yeah, yeah. On being a culprit of one of
But we
them.
also get reimbursed by the college, so, on their false alarms, and any alarm really there, so.
What's the volume from Gordon generally? Figure?
20,
70 calls for half the year, so 140 for the year.
So there you go. So that's, you know, maybe 20% of the calls
Yeah.
are just to Gordon. And we're paid for 100% of the personnel costs, and then $50 a ride vehicle costs for any fire responses to Gordon. So
And
we
is the
bring in
50
anywhere from $40,000 or $50,000 a year.
And does the $50 cover actual costs?
yeah, pretty much.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it's,
So
Yeah, for the gas over and
$50
stuff.
For the vehicle.
Right,
Yeah,
I just didn't
wear and
know if
tear
that
and-
was actually covered the costs or not.
And that's per truck per run, so
Yeah.
3 trucks head out over there, it's 100.
Okay.
yeah.
That revenue goes to other charges for services or something like that, is that right, from the Gordon? And that's not in the fire department budget, or is it?
The revenue?
Yeah, the revenue.
Goes general fund.
General fund, right, thank you, Liz. Okay, so all in roughly, I mean, you've covered it year over year, it's very close, some decreases due to the salary that you've explained, and minor capital decreases, free cash for the radios, 30,000. So all in, 600, another 120, I'm ballparking here, 715-ish for
Yep.
FY '19
Yep.
out of our 18-ish million budget. Seems to make sense, and there's potential opportunities to be a partner with Hamilton. Certainly looking forward to hearing about the
Yep.
pilot program and the ambulance
Yeah.
as well. And next steps on that, you said were some logistics, some technicalities with billing or.
Just waiting on Medicare approval so
Medicare.
we can bill.
Yeah.
And then
Why is it?
All waiting for.
Cool. I'll see it going down the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would think.
just don't be in it.
No, I see it going down the road from a distance, from afar, and tip of the hat to
Listen.
it.
I'll ask later.
Any other questions for Chief
No,
Cabinet?
I'm good, thank you for what you do.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Keeping our residents safe.
I didn't know if they were connected somehow. Thank
No,
you.
no, I don't think so. No. Okay, James.
This isn't permitting. Yeah, my book needs a whole rebuild.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Jim.
Hi,
James.
how are you? Jim Reynolds. from the Council on Aging.
541.
541 is
Thank you.
the department code. So, as far as salary and wages are concerned, it's pretty much a 2% COLA. And otherwise an increase in wages for our outreach coordinator from $11.50 to $15. We did a little bit of a study on that, and typically an outreach coordinator might have an MSW and would cost more in the neighborhood of like 20, 23, something like that. But this is a big improvement, and so I'm happy with that. As any questions about that? Salary, wages, we've got essentially 2 van drivers. There's 3 positions noted, but I have 2 drivers, one on Mondays and Fridays and one on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. And I have a administrative assistant dispatch person working 19 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a, well, I'll mention that later. So as far as expenses are concerned, there are really no changes, mostly because of our van gift account, which affords us the ability to pay for our fuel from that gift account. So anyways, so that's offset. And then the formula grant that we get through the federal government is about an $8,350 sum, and we'll apply a portion of that to offset our cost for health and wellness instruction. We run 3 classes a week, and then otherwise, can't remember what the other part so, oh yeah, for the salaries is in addition. So, pretty much straight, flat budget.
Quick question. Is that $8,300 grant, Jim, is that annualized? Do you have to apply for it every year? How does that work?
I have to send in a report to the Executive Office of Elder Affairs.
Yeah.
And in that report, kind of compile all the hours associated with our transportation system, as well as all the programming aspect of things. And we have all those numbers based on software. It's called My Senior Center.
Yeah.
So it's able to compile and provide numbers for everything we do. We input it for every class we have.
So it's pretty much renewable. It sounds what it sounds like.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's not a competitive grant as much as
not at all.
Renewable application process that, if we fill all the boxes correctly and honestly, we get the dollars back.
Right, and we get $11 per person over the age of 60, based on the 2010 census.
And that's the formula for?
Yeah, so that's the formula.
Oh, good.
And that rate has gone up, so, by $1.
I'm guessing our 2020 census numbers are gonna see, we'll see an increase there, certainly.
Yeah.
We know our 60-plus population has increased pretty significantly just in the past 3 years, 4 years, you've been here, Jim. So
Yeah.
I'm sure from 2010 to 20, we're going to see a good jump in that.
Yeah. I'm happy to see the state government anyways has sort of stepped up, and they're behind what we're doing anyways, in theory. Charlie Baker's talk the other night was, favorable toward Councils on Aging and the monies that they dole out, so that was encouraging.
I have a historical context question, like I've asked already tonight of other departments. About 4 years ago, the budget bumped up 20,000. It looks like it went up 10 or 11 on salary and wages and 10 or 11 in expenses from 15 to 16. Do you know what that was?
I think it was me. I'm pretty sure.
Is that when you started?
I think the selectmen agreed to pay, me a more competitive wage, and it was
Yeah.
based on a study that was done by UMass.
Sure. Is that when you started, or were you here before that?
I'd been here before that.
Okay.
I'd worked for like maybe a year and a half or so, or 2 years.
Yeah, so we had done it actually started before my time, but was implemented 6 or 8 months after I'd been here. UMass Collins Center had come in, they'd done a full wage and classification study for all our non-union employees.
UMass who?
UMass Boston, the Collins Center.
Oh, Cullen, got it.
So they did a wage and classification study for all our non-union employees, so about 21 at the time employees. So they got external comps, they created job descriptions for each position, they ranked those positions based on a number of different metrics to try to get internal equity. They created a grade system, and coming out of that, there were a couple positions that were clearly, the pay wasn't competitive, either both based on internal and external equity. So there were adjustments made to those positions at the time based on that rationale. We had 8 comparable communities and had all the data to support it. So when the system was implemented, there were those couple employees who got adjusted up, and Jim was one of them.
Was there anyone that got adjusted down, do you recall?
No, I think honestly that part of the reason why it was commissioned in the first place, and again it preceded me, but
Everyone's underpaid?
No, there was an issue with staff retention.
Yeah.
People could go to other communities on the North Shore and do the same thing for better money. And so they were cycling through a lot of staff, especially department heads. And so they wanted to make sure that, they wanted to have a clear sense of what was out there so that there could be a formalized system as opposed to, kind of one-off reacting to somebody having an opportunity somewhere else and coming to town and saying, I'm underpaid and this is where I should be this way. Basically, what was done was everybody was brought up to, there was a 25% range established for each grade in each position. And at minimum, all those employees were brought up to the bottom of that grade.
Okay.
And it definitely has made a difference. I appreciate it.
You're still here, thank you.
Still here.
You don't want to lose it.
4 years later.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, Jim, you finished your master's degree about 4 years ago too in geriatrics.
May of 2016, I finished.
Yeah,
It took like 3 years.
Did that
That's
kick
probably
in like
when-
with the police or anything?
No,
like
we
that?
don't. We haven't quite gotten there yet.
All right.
No, we don't have.
I like
we
that
don't
idea.
have. Here we go. Coming from the school side of things, right? Grades and lanes
Steps and
and
lanes.
no. Basically,
but-
all we have. But to be clear, honestly, part of the recommendation from the Collins Center at the time was that we not only establish ranges for each position, but that there be steps within those.
Yeah.
Yep.
And because historically it was just COLAs and that was it. So first year was ranges only. Last year, the board adopted a step system based on merit.
I was going to say, is the step you're talking about the merit increases that we're seeing here?
And this is the first year
Yep,
then
okay.
that they were funded, and that's going
And that was
forward.
the impetus for the merit increases.
That was
Got
where
it.
it came from. Yep, was instead of just marching along on a longevity step, it was to tie it back to performance evaluations.
Great.
Yeah, the only other things, about that, I'd say is like I work for 32.5 hours coming from the private sector. I've never worked, less than 40 hours, and it's pretty hard to do in the role I'm in.
Oh, yeah.
But, because it's, we want to, if anything, the direction we're going is toward more service, as opposed to less service, because things are happening on the weekends. People would like to have transportation on the weekends.
So are you saying you're budgeted for 32.5 hours, but in reality, you probably do more?
Yeah, pretty regularly more. But it's okay. I'm good. And we do have a new van this year too. It's an FY17, but we got a grant for a new van from the Mass DOT this year, so we should get that in May of this year. So that'll certainly keep vehicle expenses.
And that
down.
pay the full cost of the van?
We paid 20%. So we were yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
$12,000, and that's actually going to be funded out of the COA van gift account.
What's the source of the funds of that again?
It's
It's
donations.
Like, yeah, it's really
Donations.
donations for all the various programming things we do. We ask people for donations.
We don't
for
charge a set fee.
the other
Sure.
causes.
So,
So I think I don't know what it averages, but $300 or $400 a month or so is about right.
Right. Okay. So they're separate from contributions towards programs that others are making to COA with it's not like a restriction on a contribution that could be for otherwise used for programming.
Right.
It's the contribution.
It's the actual,
for riders,
for
primarily.
riders. So we might, we don't require people to pay. We ask for
Understood.
donation of maybe $3
Okay.
For trips.
Got it.
To and fro, whatever.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
is that it? Okay.
Thanks.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. My agenda's buried, but Steve's here,
Steve.
so that must mean assessors.
141.
Thank you, Leslie.
Jim didn't mention it, but he's planning to personally wash and wax the van, too.
Probably will.
Sounds like it. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Ozahowski. I don't know many of you, but I think I crossed paths once.
Great.
I'm the assessor, principal assessor. You have my budget request. Pretty straightforward. How can I, what should I say? I'm fairly new at this.
So no changes since November?
No.
Okay.
Nope, a slight increase just because of fees and cost of living. That's it.
Yep. Measure and list status is,
It's probably about 3/4 done, and I do believe we have sufficient funds to cover the balance.
great, yeah. We funded that in 2 parts, is that right?
we did.
Yeah.
Yep. And the second part was approved by town meeting from overlay surplus last year.
Right. Get the remainder of it done. Just
Right.
plow forward and take it.
I'm so-
Go ahead.
What was that? I'm sorry, Alex. What was the?
Measure and list, maybe a quick overview of that
Measure
initiative.
and list.
The Department of Revenue requires that every town attempt to get into every property, every city and town, once every 10 years.
Okay.
And that has not been done in Wenham for a while. My predecessor attempted to do it himself as best he could. And, but in terms of encompassing one-shot type of thing, hasn't been done for decades. So as a result of, well, we hired this gentleman who's been doing this for many, many years, and he has been very successful at what he's doing. He's been able to gain access at an unprecedented rate because, I mean, think of it, somebody's knocking on your door and saying, hey, I want to come in and look around. And he's a nice guy, and he is, because of his experience, he's been able to do that. And as a result of that, between interior inspections and just general exterior inspections, we found all kinds of things that we did not have on the books. And that resulted in significant new growth last year, which I think has been helpful to the town. And also, you might have noticed that values are increasing. But the measure and list, he's done about 3/4 of the town. We have, off the top of my head, I want to say $8,000 or $10,000 left, which should be enough. I think it's $8,000 left, which should be enough to cover. He's now dealing with areas that are more less densely populated, so it takes longer.
Right.
And we also have two different rates. It's one rate for the estate properties, one rate for the regular. And so he's planning to pick up when the weather breaks, and and he should finish by June 30th. That's our aim.
Yeah, what was the, I remember seeing an email about how much the valuation has increased with the new growth from the measure and list. Does anyone remember offhand what that was?
So we
Several
projected
hundred
new growth,
thousand?
we projected new growth at $100,000 for last fiscal year.
From the measure and list?
No, so
Yeah.
that was total new growth.
Yeah, okay.
And I think we projected about, it came in at 208,000 actual new growth for FY17, and about 85,000 of that difference was attributable just to the measure and list project. And that was entering about a quarter, 20%, 25% of the changes into the system. So we're looking at several $100,000 in captured new growth, which you extrapolate back up based on the tax rate in terms of the overall property valuation increase that's seen. But I think our property valuation went up $9+ million townwide last year, and again, a lot of that was just from the measure and list project.
You're capturing two things, correct? I mean, you're capturing a valuation discrepancy change to reflect over time the increase in the proper assessed value.
But that's not the new growth.
That's not the new growth, right?
No.
New growth requires construction to have taken place.
Yes, more or less, yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about here. But of course, the valuation changes through assessment updates as well.
Correct.
The market value.
Correct.
Right.
So the measure and list covers both, though, right?
In essence,
Well, measure and list, right, but the measure and list, only, new growth is, to Alex's point, it's only from, things that we weren't aware of in terms of, it's not, changes in the valuation.
Right. So, the most extreme example, somebody put on a 20 by 40 addition that we had missed. So there's 800 square feet of living area.
It wasn't permitted?
It was missed. Something didn't get signed off, something didn't get into the system. That's why you do the measure and list, is to pick up these errors. So there was a mistake, we picked it up, that's new growth. Values are going up. You just read the newspaper. That's a whole different thing, and that I attempt to catch on a case-by-case basis as the properties sell.
Or basement, as it were.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing, because the nice thing about MLS is that they give you all kinds of photos. So if we've got something assessed at 600 and it sells for 800, I can usually figure out why. And there's been a lot of that, and by capturing, that is new growth most of the time. A new roof is not new growth. Okay, so there's a line, but if we've got an effective year built of 1975, which indicates the property has not been updated in many years, and I look at the MLS photos and we've got this, gorgeous new kitchen and a bathroom with a jacuzzi and a diving board, then it's that's inconsistent with our records. I revised that, and that is new growth because we didn't catch it. People take out, they do additions and they don't take out permits. That's a fact.
Yeah, two things. One is certainly since Steve and Jackie have been on board, they've tightened up the process, connecting permitting to assessing, so that we don't anticipate any of those, projects that have been permitted slipping through the cracks in terms of capturing the new growth. And the other is getting back to, inspectional services, there's some potential value in having a full-time inspector that's available 5 days a week and in town, to avoid folks who don't necessarily want to go through the process of pulling a permit for whatever reason. And so that's something that we think could capture some value that isn't really easy to put your arms around by having a full-time
Further
building
tighten up
inspector.
that, let fewer go without being captured.
Yeah, there are just some projects that permits aren't ever
It
pulled,
happens.
and we think having an inspector around, eyes and ears, and being available, Monday to Friday is going to help on that.
So, when someone gets their home reassessed, it's optional if they submit the assessed value if it changes to the town, or is that like an automatic process where it goes to the town to be recorded? For example, we've refinanced our mortgage multiple times and keep having our home reassessed. And so I have actually submitted that to the town because sometimes it went down. I was just curious if that happens automatically or if it's up to the homeowner.
You're talking about an appraisal that was done.
Yeah.
That's
Appraisal,
fine?
sorry,
Fine.
yep.
I'm a real estate appraiser. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And the difference between appraising and assessing is very significant. And what a lot of people misunderstand is that if they refinance, that appraisal report goes someplace, like to the town or to the state or to the registry of deeds. That is never a public record. So an appraisal is private between you and the lender, and that's it. So if your appraisal comes in high or low compared to your assessment, well, that's a function of the competency of the appraiser, the accuracy of the assessment. The assessment is a reflection of mass appraisal system, which, what an assessor's dream is, an entire town of 3-bedroom ranches on 10,000 square foot lots. Okay? But an appraisal just does your house, not the whole town of 3-bedroom ranches. So the point is that they are two very different things, and if you submit your appraisal as support that your assessment is too high,
Yes.
then there are rules that govern that technically, and I don't want to get into that now. But the point is that if there is a discrepancy, the assessors are happy, the Board of Assessors are happy to review that, and that's what the tax abatement procedure is all about, which is what's happening right now.
Sure, and I wasn't even just asking for my own personal use. I was just curious, we're looking at these different ways to capture home values and how it affects revenue. And I just didn't know if there was something in the appraisal process that gets fed, but it doesn't, so thank you.
Yep. It's appraising is confidential.
Okay.
Yes.
On that note, are overlay reserves, no, they're not captured in the assessor's budget?
They aren't. So there's, $220,000 in overlay reserves. If you remember Municipal Modernization Act, they used to be specific to a fiscal year. Now they're all fully rolled up. So there was $135,000 budgeted for this fiscal year. There was 85,000 or so from prior fiscal years. So there's 220,000 currently in the overlay, and we've had conversations. Once we get through the abatement application deadline tomorrow. Board of Assessors, I think, is going to meet next week.
A week after.
Week
We have
after?
conflict. We met Tuesday.
Yep.
And we did a preliminary review. Things were looking good.
So there may be some overlay surplus available to be released.
That's almost guaranteed.
Yeah,
The-
so
the
we
prior-
just,
the
it's a matter
prior
of how
years.
much.
You keep the prior years on the books for prior year. You used to keep the prior year overlay on the books for prior year abatement applications that had gone to the appellate tax board. But now, since it's all one thing, you don't need to be so picky. But fortunately, we do not have any pending cases in front of the appellate from prior years. So therefore, the almost $85,000 should be free and clear.
And that could be used, you know, last year we used it for some capital. The balance of it fell out to free cash. But it would be, you know, once it's released by the Board of Assessors, then it can be appropriated by town meeting,
Right.
or would fall out to free cash.
And whatever happens, you know, to reflect prior abatement requests are in process, that go to court or whatever, that's that. But budgeting forward, did we go up to 135 because of an expectation increase in
No, so
abatements?
it's been at 135 for
Oh, it has been.
a long time.
85's left over.
85's
from
left
prior
over from
Gotcha.
the 3 years.
Sorry,
So,
thank you.
So the 135, just to be clear, we pay the senior tax work-off program from that.
Right.
And there's also a number of exemptions, about $10,000. So that 135 in reality is more like 110,000 for the actual abatements. And abatements have ranged between 70 and, you know, they're generally in the ballpark of $70,000 or $80,000 a year. So
I'm
there's a little
optimistic
bit of-
that
what's
it'll
that?
be, I'm optimistic that it will be less.
Presumably with the Measure and List project, we have the most up-to-date, you know, current data and information possible. So a little harder to submit an, you know, abatement application if we've just recently been in your house.
You've got till tomorrow to dig through the refi paperwork, find the lowest appraisal. Go down, talk to Steve first thing in the morning.
I already did that. And
Get the
you
lowest
were very
one.
accommodating, thank you.
The lowest one would have been your highest rate, so look for the highest rate.
Just a quick question about the overlay. Is the overlay reserve account just from the abatement process, just from the assessed value process, revenues? I'm not clear.
The overlay is a budgeted item in preparation for people asking for an abatement.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay,
it gets applied, it gets applied to the tax rate, so you don't see it in the operating budget.
Okay.
But you'll see it in the warrant book, when we're
Okay.
looking at
Yeah,
at
I
next
just needed
year's.
to, I remember it, but I just needed to clarify.
It's on the tax recap sheet. Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Steve, thanks a lot.
Thank you
Can
very
I
much.
assume my budget is approved? Thank you, guys. Well, I've been involved with town government for a while. What you guys do, thank you.
Same to you.
Likewise,
lot.
thanks. It's gone back up.
Good.
That was like 7 years ago.
Leslie, right?
Yes.
That's
That'll be
the
1:30.
finance. 1:30.
I fixed it. Future
Here we
reference.
are.
So, not much change, other than the salary and wages, going up by a little over 8,000, and that's really just due to the COLA and merit for non-union employees, which are all 3 of us in our department. And there's a decrease of expenses around 4,500, which is really just that it was budgeted because we didn't have a town accountant. So it mainly was just added training in there, so we were able to lower the expenses because we have a full-time accountant. So, and we're working well.
Who's First Southwest? Just again,
That is our
curious.
financial advisors, they're the ones that
Okay.
do our debt and reporting and that. So that is their base for every year, 1,500.
Okay.
If we were to do some refunding or, you know, go out to do some debt, that could go up. I think it goes up to maybe 3,000, but I'm not sure. It's between 15 and 3, I believe.
Thank you.
Can you explain, so I just, just so I understand, the 10,000 expense for tax liens?
So that's what we budget, we put it, I mean, I don't we have a $10,000 set amount. We don't, I have never seen it spent while I'm here, the whole amount, so whatever we don't spend goes to free cash, but we put that aside to do the ads when I do the, I mean, I don't know if you just recently saw, but I had just placed an ad in the paper for our tax liens for
Oh, yeah.
17.
I remember seeing that.
A very,
Yeah.
very expensive ad, but
Oh.
we're legally required to do that.
Yeah, and you
Oh,
sent us an
okay.
email about it, I think.
So you got, these are public notices.
Right.
and-
Also,
Oh.
as that goes, we'll also pay our attorney
Oh.
to do the land court. So if we go ahead and, well, he files that,
Yep.
as well as any cases after 6 months in the tax lien process, we can go after them to, you know, try to collect the money, or we'll end up
Okay.
taking the house.
Yep.
How much was the ad?
Just under $3,000.
Salem Evening News, was it?
Correct.
How big was this ad?
Very large.
It's a page.
Yeah, very, very,
right?
no, well, I mean, no, it was only
Not even.
a half, I don't think, but it was,
It's like 25 properties or something, right? Ish, couple dozen maybe?
yeah, it was really mainly one, but I had to report all of that, but, yes. It was- But it's all the required information, you have to put what,
So it's a detailed, it's a very detailed public
all
notice.
requirements,
It's
everything in there was.
statutorily required, yeah.
Yes,
And we, I mean, going back since Leslie's been here, we've recovered, you know, obviously nothing we ever project out for revenue, but we've recovered hundreds of $1,000s in tax title, outstanding tax title.
Oh.
And to the point now where there's very little tax title left.
Yeah, not much
It's
left,
a reason why our free cash numbers have been as high as they have, honestly, because
Yeah.
it's, again, nothing you necessarily know when that's gonna come in and what it's gonna be.
Right.
But yeah, we certainly have done as much as we possibly can on tax title.
I mean, you saw that FY 17, it was about 88,000, and practically 36,000, I believe, was that one property, so.
Right.
Mhm.
That's it for 17, everything else was collected.
Yeah.
Look, thanks for
job.
the explanation.
I have a reflecting back question, and I think it might be when you were hired. But from 17 to 18, it went up 45,000 approximately in salary and wages. Is that when, I was just wondering what that is.
That's when I became treasurer collector, too.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was, if you look at, the finance department has had a lot of staffing
Yes.
changes over
Yeah,
the years.
right,
So
right.
every year, there's these kind of,
Well, and it
pretty
even went
dramatic
down one
fluctuations.
year.
If you, well, yeah, and if you look in like 15, the
Yeah.
expenses were really high because we hired out a lot of the management and oversight of the
Yeah.
finance office. And then we hired a finance director. And then in 17, the 17 actual was down because we went through a good portion of the year.
With just,
With
You?
yeah,
Me.
it was Leslie and Karen and a very, very part-time accountant who was just keeping the AP warrant process going and doing bare minimum. So I think the 16 to 18 is probably, skipping 17 is probably the best way to do it. That said, there was still an increase, between who was here and then the folks who were in those positions now.
Thanks.
Any other finance questions?
Can I
Great
ask-
job.
Can I ask a question on a different department? If it was covered last week, then I'll retract the question. What is the Veterans Department?
I don't think we covered that.
543.
Do
If you
that
covered
last
it
week?
last time, then
I don't think we
No, I
did.
don't think we have, Mike.
No, we
We
haven't.
haven't gone over veterans.
I was just curious, it's 543?
So
So
we,
I see it in your budget, so I was just curious as to what it is.
yeah, so we're part of the Eastern Essex Veterans District, along with, and we have been for many years, going back at least into the 80s. We were one of the original communities. So it's a shared service model. There is a full-time veterans agent and a full-time assistant.
The one up
In Ipswich?
in Ipswich?
Yep, exactly. So, they're there to provide access to Chapter 115 benefits, which are state benefits. And.
She also works VA and all of those stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So it's
okay.
basically to be there as a resource to veterans, and there's obviously a formula based on population, and that is our share of the costs.
Towards her salary? or
Towards her salary and the expenses, basically towards the budget for
Oh.
running that office.
Oh,
It's shared amongst the 8 communities.
oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
All right, we made it through department reviews. Yes, then.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And Leslie, thank you for running such an awesome finance department. Doing a phenomenal job. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that we've got, the budget's taking shape in terms of the specific details within each department. No, I mean, these are small increases year to year. Major capital, no major salary increases, aside from some, staffing changes are gonna bring in fluctuations. So we have meetings next week, of course, that's it for this week. And in a minute, we've got minutes from our 2 meetings last week, 23rd and 24th. Next up is the 7th, I believe. Is that, David, is that the?
Yes.
So
7th
next
and the 8th.
Wednesday and Thursday, I
And
think,
Thursday of next week.
right? It's a Wednesday, Thursday. We'll be at the Bucher, so with the school committee, administration, and Hamilton.
Yeah, and that, I'm working through whether the selectmen from both towns are gonna be at the table formally at that meeting or not. Obviously, we sent a letter off to the school district and Hamilton and everybody else. And so, there's some pretty substantive policy discussions I would anticipate have happening next week, and so, I've got to finalize whether the selectmen are gonna post that meeting as well, but I would expect that to be the case.
Okay.
I'd heard also that Hamilton Fin-Com was gonna send a comparable letter out.
So I've heard similar things. I haven't seen a draft yet. I would anticipate that coming in the next couple days. I know they had some discussion about it at a meeting or meetings last week. And certainly, as soon as we get anything along those lines, we'd circulate it around to all of you if it didn't get to you directly.
Have we had a response yet to our letter?
There's been no response that we've received, no. None of us have, no, so.
So at the 8th meeting, will we have their budget response at that point?
13th.
The 7th, you mean?
7th,
The 7th?
next Wednesday.
Yeah, so it's next Wednesday with the school committee.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that certainly is the expectation, is that we're gonna have a discussion around where they're at least going, the direction they're going, relative to next year's budget, and then what that means,
But we won't necessarily have a final approved budget by the school committee.
They won't, because they're gonna.
It's later on in
That's
the
gonna be on
month.
the 13th.
Okay.
Yep.
But we'll have
Which
maybe a
is-
sense of where they.
Well, that's, I think, the reason for the meeting was, initial check-in, and then, they're gonna meet with their principals and go through their process,
Yep.
same as us, and then circle back and see where they're.
Right, and just point of clarification, that the regional school district did send this week the same tentatively adopted budget document, which we've seen, that was at the early January meeting.
January 3rd, yeah.
That was then, the project was to Wenham FinCom and Board of Selectmen, but that was more of a formality in terms of, I think, just presenting it in the way that they did versus our obtaining it through the meeting, right? Would you agree that's just?
Yeah, I think they were trying to make sure that they were following the letter of the law of the regional agreement. So they could say that they sent that tentative budget to Wenham, to the
Which we
FinCom.
have,
Yeah.
right?
We already
Yeah.
have,
Right,
yeah,
that's what I thought.
pursuant to
Yeah.
the
Yep.
regional,
Yeah.
agreement, they had to send it, but it's nothing new, and it wasn't in response to the letter, so, but I did want to point out that they had just sent it yesterday.
Communique has
Monday.
happened.
So we can ask pretty detailed questions next Wednesday?
I would anticipate that to be the case.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna need to know.
Get to the nitty-gritty a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, just with any department, we
Okay.
can ask about any line item I'd hope they would
Okay.
want to speak to.
So the process is, so the vote on January 3rd, whenever it was just to accept the preliminary budget so they can debate it and go through it. That's what happens over the next few weeks, correct?
Yeah, and that again was language that is in the regional agreement,
Yep.
that they have to, the school committee has to tentatively adopt a budget by a certain date before town meeting, and so the timing of it was such that they were essentially presented the budget for the first time from the superintendent, had some, brief discussion about it, I think you were at the meeting, and then tentatively adopted it just so that they could be compliant with the regional agreement, not necessarily because it was an expression of their support.
Endorsement of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay. So, to Jack's point he made, I don't know if it was last week or the week, last BOS meeting, there's a timing issue. We can talk about it offline or not, but there's an issue, or could be something where if certain dates are met, the budget is passed without input from the boards. Like it has, like certain parts of the, I'll go back to the tape and get back.
Did it
You're talking about the debt
Show my
exclusion?
age.
That was for the debt
Yeah.
exclusion.
Yeah, so the debt
Okay.
exclusion, right, so.
So for the sprinklers and everything else that they would want,
Correct.
okay.
But we have,
Thanks,
the
Kathy.
town, the Board of Selectmen, actually technically has a window, once we've been formally notified by the school committee,
Correct, okay.
that they've approved moving forward with debt exclusion, to then either put it on the ballot or not. And if they didn't respond within that time frame, by default,
We go on.
no, it would be approved without a debt exclusion. So that's not the case in
Okay.
in this situation.
All right, thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
I'm done.
Good question.
And I think I would also anticipate having a discussion about both debt exclusions, proposed debt exclusions, at that meeting next Wednesday. And I don't know the extent to which the school committee has discussed them at this point. But clearly, it's the last time that everybody around the table gets to understand whether they're seeking to move forward and why, and ask any questions about that.
Okay.
The school, the sprinkler project and the turf field project in high school.
Okay, so before we wrap up, we've got, thanks to Catherine, meeting minutes from the 2 meetings last week. It's good to stay on top of these, and with frequent meetings come frequent minutes, and then we can approve them and get them formally on the books. So January 23rd, January 24th FinCom meetings. Both included department reviews, as you recall. Thank you, Carrie, for helping to review as well, and suggesting some changes, some edits, which have been incorporated, and those that are in your packet as well. And I realize while they were sent electronically, it was not long ago, so please take a minute to.
So my email is
Review and
down
question.
again. These were sent out earlier?
I sent them late this afternoon.
Okay.
I
might
think
have
I got
missed it
them
then.
yesterday.
Okay.
So, I sat on them for a day, which I don't usually do. But they're certainly concise, essentially 2 pages each, so please review, provided there's comfort in approving, we'll do so. And then the one thing I just pointed out earlier was on the 23rd.
Yeah, it's, that OPEB is 40K.
And I just didn't know if in reviewing, if it looked as though it was budgeted for 30K, but there is mention of increasing 10,000 annually, so I suppose that kind of, for FY19, OPEB is budgeted at 40,000.
The 20, oh,
Right.
20.
So it's on page 2.
Right here, right? Is this what you're referencing?
Yeah, in the
Exactly,
under
yeah.
miscellaneous administration.
But, again, with wording that it's increasing 10,000 annually, I mean, certainly the budget itself is going to reflect 40,000. So, is that easy enough? Thanks, Scott. Okay. Any comments or
No.
questions or concerns?
I mean this in the correct, Carrie, you went through these?
I did.
Okay.
I
you're good.
didn't scrutinize numbers.
Okay. But you have a good eagle eye. I want to make sure that I went through and it's okay, but you catch things I don't. So if you didn't catch anything.
Sure, and the numbers in general looked
Okay.
great, except for that 10,000. It's not funny, 10,000 is a lot of money.
Point of order, can we vote on these jointly, do you know? Or do we do so independently to approve and adopt minutes? Do you know if we can
I think.
to get together, both together?
Oh, both
Yeah,
sets.
yeah,
You're in the
yeah.
Roberts.
So you can, under a single motion?
Yeah, single motion, thank you,
Yes.
that's what I'm trying to ask.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right, I'll make a motion that we accept the meeting minutes from January 23rd and 24th, excuse me.
Second.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Mike. Carrie. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. I'll move to adjourn. FinCom?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Works. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Very good.